Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today, we're going to dive into a fascinating topic, security enhanced Android. Now, Android is one of the most widely used mobile operating systems in the world, but with great popularity comes great responsibility, especially when it comes to security. Now, the foundation of our discussion is a research paper titled Security Enhanced SE Android, Bringing Flexible Mac to Android, authored by Smalley and Robert Craig and published in 2013. This paper highlights some serious shortcomings in Android's security model and proposes a game-changing solution, integrating SELinux to enforce mandatory access control, MAC, at the kernel level. But before we get into the SE Android solution, let's take a step back and understand how Android's security model works in the first place. So Android security is actually built on a two-layer model. Think of it as a two-step process that controls how apps interact with the system and each other. The first layer is the application layer permissions model. This is the most visible security feature that we, as users, interact with. You know when an app asks for permission to access your camera, contacts, or location. That's this layer at work. Apps request access, and users grant or deny it. It sounds good in theory, but as we'll see, it has its flaws. Now, the second layer operates at a deeper level. This is called kernel-level sandboxing, which is enforced through discretionary access control, or DAC. This basically means that each app runs in an isolated environment with a unique user ID, UID, preventing it from directly accessing another app's data. This is meant to limit the damage a malicious app can do, but as we'll discuss next, DAC has its own weaknesses. Now, on the surface, DAC sounds great, right? Apps are isolated, permissions are required, so what's the issue? Well, there are a few major problems with this approach. Once an app is granted permission, it gets broad access to that resource. For example, if you allow an app to access your storage, it might be able to read all your files, not just the ones you expect. Some apps intentionally or accidentally leak sensitive data. Think about a messaging app that stores chat backups in an unprotected location. A malicious app could steal that data easily. Now, this is a big one. System daemons are background processes that handle essential tasks on Android, but under DAC, these daemons often run with high privileges and are not properly confined. This means that if an attacker compromises a single system process, they could gain access to critical system components. So how do we fix these problems? That's where SE Android comes in. The goal is simple. Replace DAC's loose security model with a stricter, more controlled approach. SE Android introduces three major improvements. Instead of trusting apps to behave correctly, SE Android enforces security rules at the system level, ensuring that even privileged processes follow strict policies. This means that, instead of just relying on user-granted permissions, SE Android adds an extra layer of security that controls how apps behave even after getting permissions. No more high-privileged daemons running unchecked. SE Android confines them within security boundaries, limiting potential damage if they get compromised. Now that we understand the weaknesses of Android's previous security model, let's talk about the motivation behind creating SE Android. Before SE Android, Android faced some major security concerns. Let's break them down. You've probably noticed that many apps ask for permissions that seem unnecessary for their function. For example, a flashlight app asking for access to your contacts or location. These permissions give apps excessive control over your system and data, opening up security risks. In Android's original model, apps were isolated from each other using discretionary access control DAC, but that isolation wasn't always strong enough. Apps could interact in ways they shouldn't, making unauthorized access to user data possible. It's like having doors that look closed but aren't locked properly. We all know that malware is a big threat on Android. Malicious apps can exploit vulnerabilities to escalate their privileges and gain access to system-critical resources. This kind of privilege escalation can have devastating consequences for both users and the system. So, what makes SELinux the solution to these problems? With SELinux, we can define detailed security policies. These policies control exactly what resources each app and process can access. No more blanket permissions. SELinux makes sure that each app gets only the permissions it needs. What's better? SELinux applies these security policies universally. Whether the app is requesting permission or not, the system enforces the security rules, making sure everything follows the set guidelines. Lastly, SELinux makes sure that no app or process can access sensitive system services or user data unless it's specifically allowed. This significantly reduces the risk of unauthorized access or exploitation. Now let's take a look at the key contributions of SE Android and how it has made Android more secure. One of the biggest hurdles was integrating SELinux into Android without causing disruptions. SE Android had to tackle technical obstacles. Making sure SELinux didn't interfere with the existing system. It was a challenge, but SE Android found solutions that worked. Another key contribution was combining SELinux mandatory access control with Android's existing security framework. This allowed Android to have stricter access control at both the kernel level and the middleware level, ensuring that security was enforced throughout the entire system. SE Android also demonstrated how SELinux mitigates security vulnerabilities. For instance, It prevented unauthorized privilege escalation and restricted the damage that malicious apps could cause. This greatly improved Android's resilience to attacks. Finally, SE Android successfully incorporated these security improvements into the Android open source project AOSP. By doing this, it made SELinux policies and Mac enforcement available to all Android vendors and developers, ensuring that these improvements reach as many users as possible. Now that we've established the motivation and key features of SE Android, let's dive into the challenges of integrating SELinux into Android. There were several technical obstacles encountered at different levels of the system. Nie will take us through these in detail. Nie, could you walk us through the challenges of integrating SELinux into Android?
Absolutely, Rakshit. Let's take a look at the challenges faced when trying to implement SELinux on Android. Now that we've discussed the motivation behind SE Android and the need for stronger security, let's dive into the challenges faced while integrating SELinux into Android. There were several obstacles that had to be tackled across different layers of the system. Kernel challenges. YAFFS2 file system lacked security labeling. One of the primary hurdles was the fact that Android's default YAFFS2 file system didn't support SELinux labels. These labels are essential for enforcing access control rules, so without them, enforcing mandatory access control was nearly impossible. To solve this, a new approach was needed to add this labeling system to the file system. Android-specific kernel subsystems required enhancements. There were also unique Android kernel subsystems like Binder IPC, Ashman, and other critical components that didn't originally have security support. These subsystems were essential for inter-process communication, shared memory, and power management. They need to be modified to work properly with SELinux policies, which was no small feat. User space challenges. Zygo process model lacked SELinux transition support. The Zygo process, which is responsible for working all Android apps, didn't allow for proper SELinux context transitions. This meant that when new apps were launched, they couldn't inherit the correct security context, limiting the enforcement of SELinux policies. Unique Android init runtime and framework needed integration. Another major issue was Android's custom initialization process and runtime environment. This had to be modified to support SELinux, ensuring that the system loaded the correct security policies at the right time. A tailored integration approach was required to make sure SELinux worked seamlessly with Android's unique structure. Policy challenges. SELinux reference policy was incompatible with Android. The default SELinux policies were designed for traditional Linux systems but were not directly compatible with Android's architecture. These policies needed to be reworked and customized to fit Android's needs. New policies needed for system security. To address these gaps, custom SELinux policies had to be created. These policies were crucial to secure system daemons applications and enforce strict access control over critical system components. Let's look at how SE Android address these challenges at the kernel level to integrate SELinux effectively. Enable SELinux in the kernel. First and foremost, SELinux had to be enabled in the Android kernel itself. This involved incorporating SELinux into the Linux security model framework. By doing this, we were able to add fine-grained security controls at the kernel level, allowing SELinux to enforce security as strict rules throughout the entire system. Implemented file system support for security labeling. Once SELinux was integrated, the next step was to implement support for security labeling within Android's file system. This meant that every file on the system could have a SELinux label, which could be used to enforce security policies that control who can access what. Secured Android-specific kernel subsystems. Let's now look at the security enhancement for Android's kernel subsystems. Binder IPC's restricted inter-process communication. We applied mandatory access control to Binder IPC Android's mechanism for inter-process communication. This restricted how apps and services communicate with each other, ensuring that sensitive data wasn't leaked between processes. Ashman controls shared memory access. Next, the Ashman mechanism, which handles memory sharing between apps, was secured by applying SELinux policies. This prevented unauthorized process from accessing shared memory and data. Wake lock and logging mechanism enforced MAC restrictions. Lastly, we secured Android's wake lock and logging mechanism. These system critical components were given additional SELinux policies to ensure that only authorized process could modify or access them. Moving on to the user space, which is equally critical to ensuring that SELinux works across the entire Android system. C library Bionic modifications. The Bionic C library modifications which Android uses was modified to support SELinux security attributes. This enhancement allow Android to apply SELinux labels across the system, ensuring that every process and file could be properly secured. SELinux tools and integration. To manage these new policies, SELinux tools were integrated into Android. These tools allow for the definition and management of security policies within the Android environment, providing system administrators and developers with the necessary utilities to control security settings. Modified Android init for early SELinux policy loading. The init process was also modified so that SELinux policies could be loaded during Android's startup phase. This ensures that security enforcement starts immediately when the system boots up, labeling files and system processes. Finally, the security labeling of system components was carried out. Every critical file, system, process, and service had a SELinux label assigned to it, ensuring that access control was applied uniformly across the entire system. Now, slide 9. Now let's take a look at the middleware and how SE Android enhance security at this level. Challenges with the middleware security. Android permission model not designed for Mac. Android's existing permission model relied on discretionary access control, but this didn't provide enforcement needed for mandatory access control. This gap had to be filled to ensure that apps were subject to stricter access control. Applications share data via Android framework services. Apps typically share data through Android's built-in framework services such as content providers. This introduces the risk of unauthorized data access, so tighter controls were needed to prevent apps from improperly sharing data. SE Android's middleware Mac approach. Install time Mac. With install time Mac, security policies are enforced as soon as an app is installed. This ensures that the app follows strict access control rules from the beginning, reducing the likelihood of security breach. Runtime policy enforcement. Additionally, runtime policy enforcement allows for continuous monitoring of access attempts while the system is running. This ensures that even while the system is active, unauthorized access is still prevented. This brings us to the end of our review of the middleware security enhancements in SE Android. Now that we have understood the challenges in integrating SE Linux, let's take a look at how SE Android configures its security policies to achieve the goal of robust mobile security. Could you take us through the policy configuration, how SE Android manages security in detail? Thank you.
SE Android policy configuration. Absolutely, Ni. Let's talk about SE Android policy configuration. Thanks, Ni. Now that we have covered the technical challenges, let's dive into SE Android policy configuration and the goal it's aimed to achieve. Oh, goals of the SE Android policy. First one is the configuration private diamonds. One of the first objective is to the restrict system dynos. There are processing running in the background the handle important task, and SE Android make sure they don't have unfettered access to the critical resource. For example, a diamond could indirectly exploit sensitivity information. SE Android keep it in check. Second one is the preventary middleware bypasses. Next, SE Android ensure application cannot bypass security policy through middleware which is help to communicated with each other could not be easy avenue malicious app to the access data they shouldn't. The SE Android security model ensures strict access control throughout, preventing such issue. Third one is the enforcing strong app isolation. Finally, the strong app isolation provided by SE Android makes sure that app interact each other unauthorized way. Even through app may have access certain resources they cannot reach into each other data. FSCRT prevention data leak or unauthorized access. Now, comparison with the Federated SE Linux policy. It is important to understand that the SE Android policy is optimized for a mobile device, while Fedora SE Linux policy are robust. They are too complex for a mobile environment, and SE Android takes a longer, more efficient approach. The Android system need to be a resource configuration to SE Android strip down a complexity found on Fedora policy. Moving on, let's talk about the root exploit and how SE Android take them. Root exploit are ongoing concern in the world of the mobile security as they allow attacker to gain root privacy and control other way. Example of the root exploit privacy. First one is a gingerbread and exploit. Their exploit target Netrix socket vulnerability, allowing a gain and unauthorized root access. Second one is the Zimpressic and raise against the cage. Third one is a killing in the name of an PS neuter. Fourth one is a memprod. How SE Android mitigates these attacks? Now, how does SE Android prevent the attacks? Let's break it down. First one is a block unauthorized kernel access. SE Android prevent attacker from exploring low system vulnerabilities. The strict access control policy block my unauthorized access to the kernel system component, make it extremely difficult for attacker to do access. Now, the second one is the prevent acceleration with MSC policies. Throughout mandatory access control policy, SE Android ensure that apps and processes cannot escalate privilege. This stop malware and root exploit from sustaining, providing a more needed layer of the security. Finally, let's dive into application vulnerability. Application being to the core of mobile platform often become the target of attacker looking to exploit weakness. Common app security issues. Here are some common security issues with Android app. First one is the weak file permission, data leakage. In the data leakage, many apps have a min configuration file permission, allowing sensitive user data to be explored the unauthorized app. This could not be sometime like a content, message, and photos. Second one is insufficient isolated between apps. In the apps often interact with each other throughout system service, and if proper isolation is not encountered, it lead a data app and access. Now the new is the case study of the app security flaws. Let's talk a look at some high profile cases where app had a security flaw. First one is the Skype. Weak file permission expose user data to unauthorized access. Second one is the Lookout mobile security. In the Lookout mobile security configuration, file leaked a proper access control, creating security vulnerability. Third one is the Opera mobile. Browser catch a file where accessibility by other apps, rising data privacy. And the new one is the SE Android solution. How does SE Android solve the issues? First one is the enforcing strict file access control via MSC policy. With MSC policy, SE Android ensure that only unauthorized app can be modified sensitive file, preventing unauthorized data access. Second is ensuring app cannot access other app data. Throughout strong app isolation, SE Android prevent app from accessing its other data. This ensures data and information stay where belong is not accessible by malicious app. Now that we have covered the app vulnerabilities, let's talk about the border threat that SE Android address and over the Pratham for a generated threat analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Utsav. Now let's look at general threats in Android security and how SE Android mitigates them. SE Androids aim to address various critical threats. SE Android prevents unauthorized root access by enforcing strict security policies. This ensures that malicious apps or attackers cannot gain root access to the system and tamper with important resources. One of the most common threats on mobile devices is the potential for apps to read or modify data they shouldn't. SE Android ensures apps cannot access data they don't have permission for, blocking any unauthorized data access. SE Android blocks attempts to escalate privileges through malicious exploits. This ensures that apps or processes cannot escalate their privileges to gain access to system level resources they should not be allowed to able to control. While SE Android offers robust security, it still has certain limitations. SE Android focuses on access control through SELinux, but it cannot fix all kernel level flaws outside of SELinux scope. If the kernel itself is compromised, SE Android won't be able to mitigate those issues. SE Android cannot protect against physical attacks or when hardware components are compromised. If attackers manage to gain access to the device hardware, the software protection becomes ineffective. Finally, social engineering attacks remain a vulnerable area. Even with strong security controls, users can still be tricked into granting permission or installing malicious apps, bypassing the protections SE Android provides. Let's evaluate the performance overhead of SE Android to understand the impact it has on system efficiency. First, let's look at the size overhead caused by SE Android. The integration of SELinux into the boot process causes a minimal increase in the boot partition size, around 152 KB. This is a relatively small increase and does not significantly affect the system's performance. The system partition also sees a slight expansion of about 136 KB, which is negligible in terms of overall storage uses. Moving on to the runtime performance, testing on the Antutu benchmark shows that SE Android has a negligible impact on CPU, memory, and graphics performance, meaning your user experience remains smooth even with the added security layer. In terms of file operation, the SoftWeg benchmark showed a minor performance impact due to security labeling. However, this is minimal and the system overall remains responsive and efficient despite the added security measure. Let's now take a look at related work in Android security and the potential failure enhancements for SE Android. There are several security frameworks that enhance Android security. Kirin focuses on permission and access control to prevent app vulnerabilities. Saint aims at privacy protection and data tracking to enhance user security. Android tracks data flow between apps to prevent sensitive information leaks. AppFence protects against app vulnerabilities and unauthorized access to user data. Looking forward, there are several areas where SE Android could evolve. SE Android could incorporate more real-time security enforcement via a runtime middleware mandatory access control, improving the security of the app interactions even further. By expanding SELinux policy coverage, SE Android could enhance access control and secure more system components and services, offering a stronger security posture for the entire device. A promising future direction is the integration of SE Android with hardware security features. By leveraging trusted execution environments and secure elements, SE Android could boost Android's overall security and make the platform more resilient to attack. Finally, let's conclude with a summary of SE Android's impact on Android security. SE Android provides significant improvements to Android security by providing stronger security models with MAC enforcement. It integrates mandatory access control to prevent unauthorized access and ensure data integrity. SE Android ensures that apps and system processes are isolated from one another, preventing malicious apps from accessing critical data. Despite its strong security features, SE Android has a minimal impact on performance, ensuring users enjoy smooth experiences. SE Android's integration has had a wide reaching impact. SELinux is now a standard feature in modern Android. It is now part of every Android release since version 4.3, making devices inherently more secure by default. The strong security measures of SE Android make it harder for attackers to compromise the devices, contributing to a significant reduction in security risk. So in conclusion, SE Android provides a robust security framework that significantly enhances Android security. It offers better protection against malware, unauthorized access, and other threats. However, ongoing research is necessary to continuously improve Android security and stay ahead of emerging threats in the ecosystem. This concludes my section. Now I'll hand it over to Roxit for the final wrap-up. Thank you.
Thank you all for your attention today. We've taken an in-depth look at SE Android and how it significantly enhances Android security by integrating SELinux and enforcing mandatory access control. Mac, SE Android addresses key vulnerabilities like root exploits, unauthorized app data access, and privilege escalation. These improvements ensure stronger app isolation, tighter control over system daemons, and better protection against malware. While SE Android strengthens the security framework, we've also acknowledged its limitations, such as the inability to address kernel vulnerabilities outside SELinux's scope, hardware compromises, and the ongoing threat of social engineering attacks. Despite these challenges, SE Android has had a tremendous impact on Android security, with its integration into Android since version 4.3. Going forward, there's still room for improvements, especially in middleware security, expanding SELinux policies, and utilizing hardware security features. In conclusion, SE Android sets a solid foundation for a more secure Android ecosystem, but continuous research and development are essential to keep pace with emerging threats. Thanks again for being part of this session.